The real frog prince. She didn't kiss him. She betrayed him. There once was a kingdom ruled not by a wise old king, but by silence. It was a land where every stone path led to secrets, and every window stayed shut after dark. The people of this kingdom didn't gossip in the market or sing in the square. They whispered behind curtains, traded glances instead of words, and lived in fear of a curse that no one dared name out loud. Deep in the forest beyond the castle, there was a pond so still it mirrored the sky perfectly. And at its center, perched on a moss-covered rock, sat a frog with golden eyes and a memory older than the trees around him. He watched the clouds move. He watched the seasons turn. And he waited. Because once, he had worn a crown. Long ago, before he had webbed feet and green skin, the frog had been Prince Alaric of Veldenmere. His name carried weight, not just in his own kingdom, but across 3 continents. Known for his wit, his strange kindness, and his refusal to start wars like the other royal sons, Alaric wasn't the kind of prince that bards wrote songs about. He didn't ride dragons or duel for sport, but he listened. He asked questions, and that made him dangerous. One spring, a new court advisor arrived, a woman cloaked in blue, wearing no name, and bearing only one strange request. Let her examine the wellspring beneath the castle, the source of Veldenmere's unmatched wealth and its mythical fertility. Crops never failed here, horses lived longer, children were born healthier, and it was all thanks to that underground spring that bubbled beneath the royal courtyard. Alaric's father refused her, but Alaric, curious and cautious, watched her. She didn't flinch at rejection. She simply waited. Months passed. One by one, the people around Alaric began to change. The cook stopped singing. The castle dogs barked at shadows, and his sister, the only soul he trusted, began to act like she couldn't remember their childhood at all. Alaric started visiting the spring at night, watching its waters glow faintly beneath moonlight, and he began to sense something. Like the water wasn't just giving life, it was taking memory, taking thought, taking will. And when he confronted the advisor, she smiled, said nothing, and handed him a small brass vial. The next day, the king fell dead. They called it a heart failure. But Alaric knew better. That vial was gone, the advisor was gone, and the spring had stopped flowing. The court declared Alaric king, but before the coronation could begin, he vanished. Not by his own choice, not by sword or poison either. He was cursed, dragged to the pond by something ancient, something that wore his mother's voice but spoke in riddles. It told him he'd been arrogant, that he'd tried to stop the cycle, that he was the last of his bloodline. And because he had tried to protect the source, he'd become its prisoner. It dipped him into the water, and when he surfaced, he wasn't a man anymore. He was the frog. For years he croaked warnings into the woods. No one heard. His kingdom fell into decay. The wellspring dried up. The trees near the palace lost their leaves and never regrew them. And the people began to forget that Veldenmere had ever been powerful at all. Until she came. Her name was Isla. No one knew where she came from, just that she arrived barefoot, dragging a satchel full of broken tools and ancient maps. She walked into the ruined palace like she owned the place, climbed the cracked steps of the old throne room, and declared herself the new royal guardian. No one objected, because no one remembered what royalty was anymore. She began repairing things. The bell tower chimed again, the gardens slowly bloomed, but more than anything, Isla spoke to the pond. She sang to it. Every morning, every evening, she called it her little truth mirror. And Alaric, still the frog, still cursed, still waiting, listened. Because for the first time in decades, someone saw him. One day she brought bread, broke it into crumbs, whispered a story about an old legend, the prince who'd been turned into a frog for betraying a goddess. They say if the right woman kisses him, she mused, he'll turn back, but only if she means it. She laughed, crumbled more bread, and said, "But I don't believe in curses. I believe in power." Alaric tilted his head. This woman, this strange, barefoot woman, didn't seem enchanted. She didn't drink from the spring, didn't act like the others who'd been touched by it. She was different. And when she whispered his name, his real name, not spoken for decades, he realized she knew exactly who he was. She didn't stumble upon the pond. She came for him. Isla started visiting every day. At first, just bread and whispers, then questions, real ones. "Do you remember who cursed you? Do you know what's beneath the spring? What would you do if you were king again?" She spoke as if he could answer, and in time he found he could, not with words, but with patterns, small movements, blinks, tilts. Isla learned him like a language, and Alaric, lonely, hopeful, desperate, began to believe. Maybe she wasn't here to trick him. Maybe she was here to help. One night the moon was high and gold, and Isla leaned close. "If I kissed you," she said, "would you turn back?" Alaric croaked. She smiled. "Then let's find out." She pressed her lips to his cold, slick skin. And nothing happened. But the pond shimmered, the trees shook. And Isla, instead of pulling away, whispered something into his ear. Something no one else would have ever known. Something his sister had told him when they were children. "You're not cursed, Alaric. You're bound." And in that moment, he saw everything, her past, her plan, her betrayal. Because Isla was not just a girl, not just a wanderer. She was the descendant of the woman who had cursed him, a daughter of the line that had fed off the wellspring for generations, draining kingdoms and rewriting history. She wasn't here to save him. She was here to finish what her ancestor started. She needed him to believe. She needed him to trust. Because the wellspring had one final gate, and only the blood of the rightful king could open it. She kissed him again, not with love, but with force. And the pond began to churn. Something ancient beneath it stirred. And Isla's eyes went wide, because Alaric in that moment wasn't just a frog anymore. He was remembering everything, and he wasn't alone. Let's pause right there. If you're feeling the heat already, good, because this is where it gets deep. Uncle Luke's about to drop a like, comment, subscribe moment you're gonna remember. If you've ever trusted the wrong person, if you've ever given your heart and had it shattered not by accident but by design, then you already know how Alaric feels. But he's not done yet, and neither are we. Smash that like, throw a comment down below, and make sure you're subscribed, because betrayal's just the beginning. The pond boiled like a cauldron, as if the very soul of the land had been waiting for that exact moment. Alaric felt it first, a pulse from the deep that shook the rock beneath his webbed feet, that made the air buzz and the trees crack. Isla stepped back just slightly, but her face was calm, almost satisfied. She had done what she came to do. She thought she'd won. But she had miscalculated one thing. When you awaken an old power, you don't get to control what it becomes. And Alaric, the true heir, the one the spring had been built to protect, wasn't just waking up. He was evolving. Isla didn't know that curse-blooded women like her could only use power borrowed from fear and history. Alaric's blood didn't borrow. It remembered. And when his golden eyes opened wide in the middle of the churning water, it wasn't a frog who stared back. It was something older than she expected, something the wellspring had locked away to protect itself. Not punish, protect. Because Alaric hadn't been cursed out of cruelty, he had been transformed into a guardian, frozen in time, watching, waiting. He leapt toward her, not as a predator, not as a prince, but as a final warning. His body, still amphibian, glowed with golden light that cracked around his limbs like lightning held in flesh. Isla flinched but did not scream. She pulled a dagger from her satchel, iron-tipped and humming with energy, and slashed the air between them. A wall of sparks split the night. Alaric slammed against it mid-leap, knocked back into the water like a stone. The pond hissed. She stepped forward and snarled, "I don't need to kill you. I just need your blood." She dropped the iron blade and held up a crystal vial. The cork hissed as she opened it, and the water recoiled from its scent. Even the wind held back. She dipped the vial into the pond, and it glowed blue, the color of a soul being stolen. Alaric tried to cry out, but frogs don't scream. He tried to swim away, but the pond pulled at him like it knew what had to happen. He thrashed, trying to climb the same rock he'd lived on for years, his rock, but Isla was faster. She struck with the blade again, cutting through the water just enough to graze his shoulder. Blood bloomed like ink. She laughed. That's when the pond turned black. Not dark, black, as if the sky above had collapsed into the water and taken the stars with it. The glow from the vial dimmed. The blade in her hand rusted before her eyes, and Isla looked around, suddenly unsure. "This isn't right," she whispered. "This isn't what's supposed to happen." From the edge of the forest, the trees groaned like old bones. A wind rose, not from the north or the west, but from below, from underneath. The earth was breathing. Something beneath the pond, something forgotten even by the curse itself, was stirring. Alaric felt his body pulled down again, not by magic or force, but by memory. And in the depths, beneath the roots of the trees, he saw them. Eyes, thousands of them, not evil, not kind, just watching. The ancient ones, the true ones, the ones who had built the wellspring not to grant life, but to guard a secret no kingdom was supposed to find, the source of balance, the breath of the forest, the memory of the land. And they were waking up. A voice, not a sound, but a thought so loud it cracked through the sky, boomed inside Alaric's mind. "You were patient." He did not reply. "You were loyal." Still no answer. "You remembered." And with that, the transformation began. His frog skin began to split, not painfully, not violently, but like a shell breaking away. Golden threads wrapped around his limbs, forming not muscles but light. His eyes shimmered, not green, but pure white. He was becoming again, not a prince, not a man, but something the kingdom had lost centuries ago, a protector born of the land itself, the guardian of memory, the key. Isla backed away, her lips trembling. The dagger dropped, the vial cracked in her hand, and for the first time, she looked scared. Not because of magic, but because she realized she didn't understand what she'd unleashed. She had come for power, for control, for a throne no longer real. But Alaric wasn't here to rule. He was here to end what she started. "You were never meant to find me," his voice thundered, not from a mouth, but from the trees, the water, the wind. It was everywhere. "You followed stories written by those who twisted history. You read spells written by liars. You believed your blood gave you right, but you forgot. I never wanted the crown." She fell to her knees. "Then what do you want?" He stepped onto the shore, feet now bare, body glowing with energy so raw the grass grew beneath his steps. "I want the truth remembered." She looked up, broken. "Then kill me." "No." "Why?" "Because death ends legacy, but truth rewrites it." He raised his hand. A root burst from the soil, wrapping around her wrists, another around her mouth. Vines lifted her like a puppet, her eyes wild with panic. And the forest began to change. The trees shed their dead bark. The stones uncracked, the skies turned pale gold, and in the center of it all, the pond pulsed once, a heartbeat from the land itself, and then stilled. The kingdom, lost to silence and rot, began to breathe again, and somewhere deep in its veins, people began to remember. Little things. A melody sung in childhood, a recipe once used by grandmothers, the names of trees, the faces of the royal family, including one young prince who had vanished on the eve of his coronation. Veldenmere woke up, and Alaric, standing at the edge of the pond, finally exhaled. He didn't return to the palace. He didn't reclaim the throne. He simply walked, through the woods, into villages, through ruins. He touched doors, and memories returned. He whispered names, and crops grew again. He wasn't king. He was reminder that truth survives betrayal, that power doesn't need to roar. It just needs to wait. Now pause right here, because if you're feeling this right now, if this story is crawling under your skin the way betrayal does in real life, then you know exactly why Uncle Luke had to tell it. Let me tell you something. Sometimes the people you think came to heal you are only there to finish what broke you. Sometimes a kiss isn't love, it's strategy. But if you remember who you are, if you remember who you were before they told you who to be, you can break any curse, even if it takes years, even if it takes silence. Smash that like button if you've ever had to rebuild after betrayal. Drop a comment if you've ever been underestimated, and make sure you subscribe, because we're only halfway through and the story is far from over. The wind carried more than just the scent of moss and earth now. It carried memory. And as Alaric walked, barefoot and wordless, through the sleeping ruins of his old kingdom, the land whispered back. Stones whispered names he hadn't heard since childhood. Doors opened before he could knock. Trees bent slightly when he passed. But this wasn't reverence. It was recognition. The land remembered him, and in doing so, it began to remember itself. Villagers, long dulled by the spring's silent poison, stirred with old instincts. A boy found himself humming a tune his great-grandfather had forbidden. A widow wept while polishing a sword she swore she'd never seen before. Stories returned. And so did the questions. Who had cursed Veldenmere? Why had the spring been buried? And what exactly had Isla come to do? The girl hadn't vanished. She hadn't been destroyed or consumed. She had been bound, her body preserved, her power sealed, her breath trapped in the roots of the very forest she tried to enslave. But even in silence, she dreamed. And those dreams bled into the land. Alaric found her chamber buried beneath the shattered library. A place she had built with her own hands, shelves full of scrolls she never let anyone read, maps drawn in layers, topography and ley lines, but also bloodlines. The walls pulsed with enchantments, but none dared attack him now. They parted, revealing a mural painted in black and gold. Two figures, twins, holding a single flame, one reaching upward, one turned away. He stared at it for hours before he realized what it meant. Isla wasn't a descendant of the woman who cursed him. She was a descendant of the woman who tried to save him. There had been two sisters, the original sorceress, Sarilith, drunk on the power of the spring, and her twin, Maria, who tried to seal it. They had fought beneath the palace before his father was even born. Sarilith wanted to bind kings to the spring. Maria wanted to destroy it. Neither won. Instead, they split the kingdom, above and below, into two truths, two timelines, two legacies. One walked the earth, one was buried under it. And Isla had inherited both. That's why she sang to the pond. That's why she never feared it. That's why, even in betrayal, something in her hesitated. Alaric turned away from the mural and began collecting the scrolls. Not to burn them, to understand them. And what he read chilled him deeper than any curse. The wellspring was not eternal. It was not a blessing. It was an anchor, keeping something asleep, something that once walked freely, disguised as gods, speaking in riddles and demanding tribute. The spring was their lock, and his bloodline had been the key, which meant Isla's betrayal hadn't been just personal, it had been catastrophic. She had broken the seal. And the thing beneath the spring, the thing neither Sarilith nor Maria had ever dared name aloud, was stirring. Not awake, not yet, but hungry. Alaric didn't sleep after that. He rode the wind to the edges of the kingdom, where ancient stones once formed a perimeter of protection, each stone etched with a different symbol, a different memory. But most of them were cracked. One was missing entirely. Another had been reshaped into a bench by local farmers, unaware that they were sitting on a prison lock. He replaced what he could. But it wasn't enough. The stones had never worked alone. They required stories, belief, names, memory. The people of Veldenmere had to remember not just their prince, but their role in keeping the world intact. That's why the curse had made them forget. Because forgetting wasn't just the end of resistance. It was the end of protection. He went to the village square where people gathered to sell bread and barter for wool. He didn't make a speech. He just stood. And the crowd turned one by one, as if their bodies knew something their minds hadn't caught up to. And then, in a voice like leaves scraping over old stone, Alaric began to speak. Not as a ruler, as a witness. He told them about his curse, about the wellspring, about the war beneath the palace and the twin bloodlines that fractured time. He told them about Isla, not to accuse her, but to reveal her. She wasn't evil. She was lost in a maze of legacy and grief, trying to choose which half of herself to believe. And in the end, she had chosen wrong. The villagers listened in silence, until a child asked, "Is she still in the forest?" And Alaric nodded. "She dreams. Can she wake up?" And he paused. "That depends." The child looked around. "Then we should sing louder." So they did. That night, the villagers lit candles, not for celebration, for memory, and they walked, hundreds of them, toward the pond. They didn't chant spells, they didn't pour potions, they simply spoke, one by one, names of ancestors, names of old teachers, songs from before the silence, and the pond shimmered. Alaric stepped forward, stood at its edge, and said only one word. "Isla." The water parted, and there she was. Eyes shut, hair floating like seaweed, bound in roots that pulsed with gold. She wasn't drowning. She was suspended, and her face, though peaceful, bore lines of conflict, as if every moment of her life had been a decision she never fully made. Alaric stepped into the pond. The roots recoiled. He reached out, not to break them, but to touch them, to ask. And they responded, because the forest remembered too. They let her go. She collapsed into his arms, gasping, not for breath, but for clarity. Her eyes opened, and for the first time, they weren't cold. They were terrified. "I saw it," she whispered. "It's moving." He nodded. "Then we have to choose what moves next." Isla looked at the villagers, at the torches, at the flickering faces singing her back to the surface. "They shouldn't trust me." "They don't," Alaric said gently. "They remember you." And in remembering, there is always hope. The night didn't end with cheers. There were no fireworks, only firelight, only silence, the good kind, the kind that fills instead of takes. And in that space, Isla spoke the words she had never dared say aloud. "There's one more chamber beneath the spring." He waited. "It wasn't built by Maria or Sarilith." "Then who?" She looked him dead in the eyes. "By your mother." Alaric froze, because no one had spoken of her in decades, not since the day she disappeared during the first rise of the spring. And now, all the old ghosts were circling back, not just to haunt them, but to test them. The entrance wasn't hidden. It had never been hidden. That was the trick. It had always been right beneath the throne, a slab of pale stone marked only by a single, almost forgotten symbol. A circle split in two, one side black, the other gold, with a teardrop in the center. Most had assumed it was decoration. Some thought it was a family crest. Only Alaric remembered where he'd seen it before, on the inside of his mother's wedding band, the one she never took off until the day she vanished. She had told him once, in a voice low and soft as dusk, that it wasn't a family symbol. It was a warning. He placed his hand on the stone. The tear in the center warmed beneath his palm. Slowly, silently, the stone began to melt, not with heat but with time, like memory itself was loosening the mortar. Isla stood behind him, unsure whether to move or kneel or run, but Alaric didn't speak. He just descended. The staircase wound downward in slow, deliberate spirals, lit only by pulses of light that glowed in rhythm with his steps. Each step deeper didn't feel like entering a tomb. It felt like being remembered by something ancient, something that had always known he would return. At the base of the spiral was a hallway carved from the bones of the earth itself, smooth, arched, and humming with something old enough to not care what humans called it. At the end of the corridor stood a door, not of stone, not of wood, but of root, twisted, living, breathing. He reached out, and the roots uncurled, not from fear, but familiarity. The door didn't open. It exhaled. And there she was, not his mother, not in the way he remembered. But her voice was everywhere. The chamber was a sphere, walls covered in carvings, in hundreds of overlapping circles, some half-finished, others filled in with symbols he couldn't read. And in the center, hovering above a basin of dark, rippling liquid, was a crown. Not gold, not jeweled, but made of woven silver threads. As if spun from moonlight itself, it pulsed softly like it was breathing. Alaric stepped toward it, and the chamber responded. The carvings along the walls glowed, and the air itself shimmered with her voice. Not spoken, not ghostly, but remembered. "My son, if you are here, then the blood has broken." He froze. "I never wanted you to bear this weight. I begged your father to leave the crown untouched. But he believed, as they all did, that control meant safety, that sealing the old power beneath the spring would protect us. He didn't realize it was never about sealing, it was about balance." Alaric reached out to the crown, but it hovered just out of reach. "I tried to break the line. I tried to leave, but the spring called me back. Not to punish, to remind. We are not rulers. We are not guardians. We are bridges between the world above and the one waiting below." Isla stepped forward now, unable to stop herself. "Then why did she vanish?" she whispered. The chamber pulsed. "She didn't vanish," Alaric said slowly. "She descended." Another wall lit up behind them, showing not text, but memories. Alaric as a boy, running through the garden. His mother, hands in the soil, whispering to flowers. A man in a robe watching from the shadows. Then, water, screaming, and a bright white flash. The next image was her face, calm and cold, eyes closed in eternal dreaming, at the bottom of the spring. "She became the lock," Isla whispered. Alaric nodded. She gave herself to the spring, to hold it closed. The crown dropped slightly, as if ready now, as if it had heard the truth spoken aloud for the first time in decades. But when he reached for it, Isla grabbed his hand. "You can't," she said. He turned. "Why?" "Because once you wear it, you don't get to leave." He stared at her. "You knew this." "I guessed. When I read the final chamber maps, I knew the crown wasn't a gift. It's a seal, a living one. It needs a mind, a heart, a soul, Not just any bloodline. Yours. So you led me here. She didn't answer. You tricked me again. I tried to stop it, she said, softer now. But you were always going to come. He turned away, looked back at the crown. It's not death, Isla said, but it's not life either. He stepped forward. I'll do it, she whispered. No, he said. I'm half of you, half your story. Maybe I'm strong enough. You're still split, Alaric said gently. Still searching. And this place, it only takes whole things. She dropped her head. So that's it? No, he said. You go back. You tell the people the truth, all of it. You build something new from what we buried. He touched the crown, and the chamber gasped. Not metaphorically. It took a breath. The roots lifted him from the ground, wrapped gently, almost reverently. The silver crown drifted down, settled onto his head. It didn't shine, it didn't burn, it simply hummed. And then the water in the basin below him changed, from black to gold, from fear to clarity. The carvings on the wall peeled back like pages, and Isla saw what had never been written in the scrolls. The thing beneath the spring, the being that slept for centuries, it was not a monster. It was a mirror, a consciousness, a test. Every few generations it would send whispers to the surface. It would call. And if the ones above answered with greed, with hunger, with domination, it would rise and consume. But if they answered with memory, with sacrifice, with unity, it would sleep again. Alaric's choice was the answer, and the mirror was satisfied. The roots released him slowly, but his eyes were different now, not glowing, not blind, just old. He had become the bridge his mother spoke of, the space between memory and power, and he wasn't angry, he wasn't afraid, he simply was. Go, he said. Isla tried to argue, but couldn't find the words. I forgive you, he added. She wept, not because she deserved it, but because she needed to hear it. She ran, back up the spiral, back through the forest, and behind her the chamber sealed, not like a door, like a book, closed, but not forgotten. The forest didn't feel the same when she came back through it. The branches that once whispered and reached toward her now stood still, tall and waiting, not in fear, in judgment. The kind of silence that comes after a storm when the sky is still figuring out if it wants to rain again. Isla walked barefoot over the moss, eyes wide open for the first time in her life, not from magic or rebellion, but from grief. Heavy, ancient grief. The kind that doesn't come from what you've lost, but from what you finally understand you never had a right to begin with. By the time she reached the village, the crowd was already there. No one had summoned them. No messenger had run ahead. They just knew that something had changed, that something had ended, or begun. Children clung to their mothers' cloaks. Elders stood with walking sticks gripped tight. The baker held his apron like a flag. All of them watched her, the woman they once called the flame bringer, the one who'd awakened the pond, repaired the bell, made the flowers grow again. But now, she looked like the very story she once tried to rewrite, a woman caught between pages. She didn't speak right away. Her voice had never trembled before. But now it wasn't trembling from fear. It was trembling from weight, from truth. And when she finally did speak, it wasn't as a leader or a witch or a descendant of power. It was as a woman who had betrayed the last man who trusted her and watched him rise into something she could never touch again. I lied to you. No gasps, no shouts, just breathe, inhaled, held. No one blinked. I said I came here to rebuild, that I was chosen, that the spring had called me, but I didn't come to heal this land. I came to unlock it, to finish a war that started before I was born, a war my ancestors whispered into my blood and told me was righteous. She took a shaky step forward. And I found him, the frog, the prince, the boy who had been cursed not because he was wicked but because he was brave, because he asked too many questions, because he wanted to protect you. So they silenced him, turned him into a story, and Her voice cracked. I kissed him, not to save him, to trick him, and still, he forgave me. Someone in the crowd dropped to their knees. Then another. Then another. I don't deserve your loyalty, she said, but I owe you the truth. She told them everything. About the spring, about the bloodlines, about the mirror beneath the chamber, about Alaric's mother, who gave herself to become the lock, about the crown of silver thread, about the price of memory. And when she was done, she asked for no forgiveness. She simply turned and said, You don't have to believe me, but you must remember. And they did, because something in the way the trees moved now, something in the way the sky lit their faces, something in the way the wind curled around their ankles and lifted dust from old stones. It told them this story had always been true. Even when they forgot, even when they buried it, even when they called it myth. For weeks, Isla stayed quiet. She didn't rebuild anything. She didn't cast any spells. She planted seeds and didn't use magic to grow them. She carried water in buckets and fed goats and swept temple stones by hand. And in that silence, the villagers changed. Not overnight, but slowly. They began to speak their old names, names their grandparents had whispered in sleep. They started to remember who they were before the spring dulled their edges. Songs came back, arguments, laughter, tears. The land healed because they did, and every night Isla returned to the pond. Not to speak to it, just to sit beside it, because the water was still, but it wasn't empty. She could feel him there, not as a man, not as a frog, but as a presence that hummed beneath the soil, pulsed beneath the surface, like the heartbeat of the world had a rhythm again. The pond glowed faintly at night now, not blue, not gold, but both. And some nights, when the moon was just right, she swore she heard footsteps in the woods. Not boots, not bare feet, just the light pressure of someone who walked without needing to be seen. One night, months after the chamber had sealed, Isla returned to the village square to find a boy waiting for her. Not older than 10, hair the color of honey, eyes sharp. You're her, he said. She nodded. He held out a piece of parchment. He left this. She froze. The handwriting, clean, steady, unmistakable, said only one thing. The bridge doesn't need to speak. It only needs to hold. Let them walk across you and learn to stand on their own. No name, but none was needed. She smiled, folded the note, and tucked it into the lining of her old satchel, the same one she once carried full of broken tools and stolen scrolls. Now it held nothing but dirt and time, but it felt heavier than ever. And then she walked. Not into the palace, not into the forest, but into the hills beyond the edge of Veldenmere, where old settlements once burned during the blood riots, where children told ghost stories about men with no faces and songs that made soldiers forget how to fight. She walked because the world was bigger than one curse, one spring, one kingdom. She walked because remembering is not enough. It must be shared. Some say she disappeared after that. Some say she became a traveling teacher. Some say she returned to the twin bloodlines and rewrote the scrolls herself. And others believe that on the quietest nights, when you walk near the edge of a sleeping pond and whisper your truest question into the wind, a woman will appear beside you, barefoot, steady-eyed, and humming a song older than the stars. They call her the traitor, the witness, the storyteller, and the one who kissed a prince not to love him, but to betray him, and still found redemption anyway. Because this isn't just a fairy tale, this is a warning. Power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it waits in silence. And sometimes the person you least expect is the one holding the final key. Not because they deserve it, but because they've been willing to lose everything to find the truth. So if this story found you today, maybe it's because you've been quiet for too long. Maybe you've forgotten who you were before the world told you to fit in, obey, fall in line. Maybe there's something inside you still croaking in the dark, waiting to be heard, waiting to remember its name. Don't wait for a kiss, don't wait for permission. Just rise. That's what Alaric did. That's what Isla finally learned, and that's why the land is awake again. If that hit something deep in your chest, you already know what Uncle Luke's gonna say. Like the video, drop a comment telling us what part broke you open, and if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Because around here, we don't just tell fairy tales, we break them wide open. Now go, and remember, because the story's not over, it's just been waiting for you.